To introduce our keynoter for this year's expo, veteran DC journalist, news anchor, and radio host Tony Perkins. Many of you know him, or should I say, feel that you know him, from his many years on local radio and television stations, as well as his years on Good Morning America. He currently is performing important roles in both radio and TV as the morning news anchor on NBC4 News, as well as joining Donnie Simpson weekday afternoons from 3 to 7 on Magic 102.3. There is so much more to tell you about Tony, and you may have read some of it in our cover story of this month's issue of The Beacon, but I want to let him share his story in his own words. When I invited him to speak to us today, he suggested that rather than giving a straightforward speech, that I interview him here in front of you all today. I thought it was a great idea, and I hope you'll be glad that we decided to do it that way. I have a number of questions I'm going to be asking him and he'll be talking about, but have no fear, we'll open the floor to questions from the audience in about half an hour. So please hold on, there are any questions that you may have that come to mind, and we'll try to get to them then. And again, tell people who come in late that they are welcome to walk in front of us and go to the seats on the other side of the room. All right, here we go. Tony.
Thank you. Hello. Oh.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Exciting. Yes. I wanted to show Tony around the expo for a minute here, so I just started to walk in the first door. He was swamped. He must have had 10 selfies with people coming up to him and say, I want to get a picture, I never got to show him the room, but anyway, he got the idea.
What I got to see, I was impressed by. Yes, it's very, very nice.
Good.
And let me just say at the outset here, thank you for having me. I'm always a little surprised when people reach out and, we want to hear your story and all that kind of thing, because I kind of feel like, okay, well, I've told it a bunch of times, people should know by now and all that kind of stuff. But I will be very honest. I do TV every day, I do radio every day. I get more nervous doing this kind of thing than I do doing TV and radio. It just feels, it's almost like I don't want the attention on me, even though I'm on TV and radio, but it's a weird thing. So.
Well, now you get to actually see the people watching you back.
Yes. Yeah, when you're on TV and radio, you have the comfort of thinking, oh, I'm doing great. Everyone's loving this. What do I know?
That reminds me of the story you told about your comedy club experience. But we'll get to that in just a minute. Okay. I want to start with your childhood. Mm-hmm. Lie down, I'll get a psychiatrist. No. Really, just asking, tell us about it. You family moved here when you were 5, I think. And you spent time going throughout the metropolitan area, PG County, DC, Virginia. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's funny. You certainly, when you're a child, you can't plan your life and plan how things are going to go. But I feel very fortunate and blessed the way that I did grow up. I was born in New York City. I'm 64 years old. My father was from here. My mom was from New York. And we moved down to be where my dad was. My parents were married, and we moved here. I grew up with a brother who's about a year and a half younger than me. So we lived in D.C. Off of Waller Place. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Waller Place. Later, Galveston Street in Southwest Washington, Galveston Apartments. These are areas that now I sometimes report on the news, because sometimes there's some rough stuff going on there. But spent my childhood in D.C., spent a little bit of time, my middle school years in Prince George's County, and then most of my growing up in Northern Virginia. High school, I still live in Northern Virginia. So I've touched all...
We forgive you.
I've touched all the area, I've experienced all the region, and that has helped me in my career with the things that I've had to do, particularly with news coverage. So.
Yes. Now, I understand also in your family there was radio history. So why don't you tell us how that maybe got you inspired as a young man?
Yes. So the doctor mentioned WOL. My dad, WOL, how many of you are from this area? Grew up here? Okay. So in the 60s and 70s, WOL AM 1450 was the radio station in town. It's interesting because, young folks now think about FM, well, they don't think about radio, first of all, unfortunately. But if they do, they think about FM radio. But back in the day, AM radio, that was the powerhouse. Those were the powerhouse stations. WOL and WMAL were the big stations in this region. And WOL served a black audience. It was the soul of the city, I think, was the expression, the tagline. And my dad worked there. He was a DJ. He worked in promotions, used to promote concerts. Did some, at that time in the 60s and 70s, black radio was very involved in the community, helping to unify the community, spread the word about different events that were going on in terms of civil rights and all that kind of thing. So he was involved in all of that. In any event, I got to see him at the radio station, and from a very young age, I was just fascinated with microphones. There was something magical about it to me. It was to see him, sitting at a console talking into a mic and knowing that there were thousands of people listening. I just thought that is really kind of cool. And it really caught my interest. A little bit later on in life, my uncle on my mother's side also worked in radio. He worked at WFIL, big station in Philadelphia, and top 40, huge station. And I went to visit him and walked into that radio station. This radio station was gorgeous. It was like the radio stations you see on TV that are unrealistic because they look so great. Most don't. This one did. And just walking in there, watching Joel Denver, he was the disc jockey, do his thing. It was just very fascinating to me. So that caught my interest. My mom used to talk about how when game shows were on TV and that kind of thing, how I would be right up against the television and I would grab a hairbrush and pretend I was interviewing or hosting a show. So it all started very, very early and kind of naturally.
Yeah, it sounds very in your DNA, basically.
Yeah.
Yes, that's really
yes.
wonderful. Okay. I understand at one time you were the editor-in-chief of your high school newspaper. Now, that was my role as well. So why did you not like journalism in terms of print journalism? You wanted to go into radio? Just a quick question for that.
No. I love print journalism. And at the time, I was the first black editor of my high school newspaper. So that was a very big deal. I was, in the journalism class and all that kind of stuff. My interest just gravitated more towards TV. Humbling moment, though, because this used to be mentioned all the time. Obviously, it's many years ago, first black editor of the high school newspaper. I still have a copy of the first issue when I took over. And the headline on the front page said something to the effect of student government reorganizes ISIS. There was an extra ISIS in there. And I thought, oh, this is a great start.
My column in the Beacon is called From the Publisher, and in one of our first issues it said From the Pulisher. So we each have our story.
Right, that's right.
All right. Maybe you framed that probably in your. So let's move on to college. So you went to AU,
Yes.
and that's where you also got involved directly in radio, right?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate, and this isn't the case for everybody. Doesn't have to be the case for everybody. I've kind of always known, I've always known I wanted to work in radio and TV. Didn't always know exactly how, but and that would shift from time to time. So when I went to AU, I majored in communications. I knew that's what I wanted to do. I was involved I worked at the campus radio station. Some other students and we were in the student government. We helped to found the student-run TV station. And I learned a lot during that period of time. And in fact, I met people who were still good friends of mine. And we all kind of, a lot of people think about the radio, and well, especially the TV business as being cutthroat and backstabbing and all that kind of stuff. And certainly there are degrees of that, there are degrees of that at every level. But for the most part, the people that I've worked with have been great people. We all look out for each other. We support each other. And some of my first jobs I got were because of people that I knew in college. There's a guy named Dave Adler who used to be on the radio here in DC. He's on radio in Fredericksburg now. He was a year before me at AU. He helped me get my very first radio job. He was working at, what was the station?
The Oldie station.
It was a big band station. Yeah, in WEAM. It was a big band station in Falls Church. Dave worked at the oldie station. That's right. And but this was before that. He worked at this big band station. He got me a job there. It was my first radio job. I remember the manager said, well, do you know big band music? I'm like, oh, yeah, I love it. I had to go home and learn it. but I did. And then another dear friend of mine, a guy named Jeff Newman, who we graduated together. Jeff later became the producer for Donnie Simpson's Video Soul, which was a super popular show on BET. And Donnie, at one point, was looking for a comedian to write for him on his morning show at WKYS. And Jeff said to Donnie, well, a friend of mine is a comedian. You should meet Tony Perkins. Jeff called me. Would you be interested? Yeah, sure, I'd be interested. Donnie was the #1 show in town. I was a fan. I listened to him. So Donnie and his wife, Pam, came out to one of my performances at the Comedy Cafe downtown. And I'll never forget, it was a Saturday night, the middle show. We used to do 3 shows on Saturday nights. The middle show in a comedy club on Saturdays always was great for some reason. The audience was fantastic. Those shows
They
were
had a
great.
few drinks by then.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Right. And I had a great set. And Donnie pretty much hired me on the spot, except that I had to say to him, I would love to work with you, but I'm booked. I'm on the road doing comedy. I'm booked for the next 3 months. And he said, I'll wait, which was amazing because, it would have been very easy for him to say, well, that's too long, And so I started working with him. So these connections in college are what led to some of these other things.
So we skipped right over into the comedy thing, which is my next topic, which I'm glad, that's fine. But tell us a little bit about when you first started at comedy. I understand you had a very interesting experience your first time at the mic.
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit in the newspaper interview. So first of all, let me say about this about comedy, because I've been doing this for a long time, radio and TV. I've been very, very blessed, very fortunate. When I first started doing radio and TV, I was still doing comedy. And I did comedy professionally for 9 years, traveled all over the country, mainly up and down the East Coast, worked my way up from open mic to headlining. Although I quit right around the time I really started headlining. So back then, everyone knew, oh, you're a comedian, I saw you in a comedy club. Now I've been doing TV news for so long, people are shocked when they hear, you did comedy? What? But I did, it was great. What really got me hooked was my first time doing an open mic. I did 7 minutes of material that I wrote. I killed. It was great. Later, I realized I've just rewritten some of the most classic jokes of all time. Very generic, but I didn't know. And so then I went back 1 or 2 weeks later, all new material, and died. I couldn't buy a laugh. And that is what kind of hooked me. I kind of thought, well, how come 2 weeks ago I was super funny, and this week I can't buy a laugh? And so I kind of got interested in the science of it, the writing part of it. And that's kind of what hooked me into it. And fortunately, I kind of figured out, oh, here's how you write a joke, and here's how you put a set together, and all that kind of stuff.
This is one of the most impressive things I learned about you when we did our story. I mean, to think someone who had that kind of a failure early on and realized that the first time I succeeded was because I was copying or whatever, and instead of saying, forget it, this is not for me, you said, this is great. I'm gonna make this work.
Right, it's kind of bizarre.
That really says something about your character.
Yeah, it's kind of bizarre. And I'll say this: I'm so glad that I did this because for a couple of reasons. Number one, when I was a kid, I was very shy, and I was pretty shy until my junior year of high school, and I took a public speaking course. Mr. Zarallo, I don't know where he is now, but took a public speaking course, and that really opened me up. It was life-changing. I didn't even really realize it at the time, but looking back, it was life-changing. And in that course, when it was my turn to put together a presentation, whatever, I would veer towards humor. My mom and dad were both funny, came from a funny family, so that's kind of naturally where I went. So I learned then, I kind of like this, making people laugh. So that was huge. Also, I like to say that stand-up comedy has informed everything that I've done afterwards, including TV news, because when you're a comedian, most comedians write their own material. I would write my set. You go out there, and I would have like a sheet of like a legal pad with my set on it, my jokes and all that kind of thing. And you go up and you're standing at the mic and you're doing your show in front of hundreds of people, whatever, or 15 people, whatever it may be, and you're doing your set. And you are reacting to the audience reaction or lack thereof while you're doing your set. So while I'm there talking and hopefully making sense and it's all coherent, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I'm not going to do the airline material. That's not going to work. I'm going to move up my bit about TV commercials. I'm going to finish with this. You're kind of rearranging your set, editing while you're doing it, but you're presenting a coherent set, and people hopefully don't know. You've just, changed things around. It's the same thing we do in TV news. Every morning, we start with a rundown for the show, the stories we're doing, who's covering what, and then you get on the desk, the show starts, and things immediately start changing. Yeah. There's a reporter's live shot goes down, or they're not ready, so we got to drop them lower in the block. We call the segments between commercials blocks. So the first block is the A block, second block is the B block. So you're shifting that. Something you do an interview and it runs over. So now the producer's telling you we're dropping our pages of stories are numbered with a letter and a number. So like F13, F14, whatever. We're dropping F13, dropping F14. They're telling you this while you're talking or what have you. And so it's the same thing. It is everything shifting around, but my job and my co-anchor Jumi's job is to present this as if it's a flowing, that we're not panicking. Like, they don't come to me and I'm like, what?
Are you kidding?
So it's the same thing.
Very good. Just a quick one. I mean, you made a phenomenal success of your life, but are there any regrets as you were getting to the headliner level of comedy that you're not still doing something else?
That's a great question. In terms of professionally, I don't have regrets. I do, but I've been very fortunate, and I'm sure everyone here can relate to this in your careers and what you've done, raising your families. Things have been, there's been a lot of great stuff and all of that, but there are always some disappointments and there are always some struggles and the like. And so there's a little bit of that here and there, but I don't really have regrets. But this is interesting to me, and maybe it goes along with the failing at comedy the second time. If you read the story in the Beacon or any other article, my career's been fantastic. It's been really, really great. I have almost never gotten a job that I myself went out for and auditioned for, or in my mind thought, "Ooh, I want to do this," and then gone after. I won't say almost never, but frequently I haven't. Because I do what I do, and hopefully I do a good job at it, I have had great opportunities presented to me, and I've taken advantage of those opportunities. But my career, in my head, my career could have been a completely different thing. When I was young, my big goal was to be a successful stand-up comedian and one day host The Tonight Show. That is, my dream was always doing entertainment, interviewing, and so I didn't do that. I never got on The Tonight Show. I got on Jimmy Kimmel Live, but I never got on The Tonight Show. But my career has still been, a large part of it, entertaining. Obviously, a lot of it is news, journalism, information, but there's been a good degree of entertaining, even within the news walls. Sometimes I'm interviewing, I just did an interview with comedian George Wallace, and, or when I was at GMA, Stevie Wonder, or whoever. So there's always been a part of that, but it's been a different path. Mm-hmm. So, it's not what I thought it was going to be, but it's been great.
So how did you get onto Good Morning America? How did that come?
I had been doing TV here at Fox 5. I've been all over the place. Yes. I've been fortunate, although now I just tell people, I can't hold a job. That's my problem. But I was at the local TV stations. I was at Fox 5 longest, and had a great run there. Had a real good time. Made some very good friends there. I had been at Fox 5 for maybe 7 or 8 years doing morning weather. Good Morning America, you will remember in the 80s, was the #1 morning show. It was Charlie Gibson, Joan London, Spencer Christian, Joel Siegel, all those folks. And then the Today Show came on pretty strong. And they made some changes at Good Morning America. Joan left, Charlie left, Spencer was the last one to leave. And the show, they had other hosts, and the show was failing. At the time, there was even some talk about, are we, for ABC, I wasn't there at the time, but there was talk within ABC, are we going to keep doing this show? And they decided, you know what, let's reinvest. We're going to keep doing this show, and here's how we're going to do it. They brought Charlie Gibson back. They brought Diane Sawyer on board. She's the biggest star in TV news, the best in the business at what she does. Meanwhile, I'm here in DC and doing my thing, and my agent at the time says, hey, I'm going to send your tape to Good Morning America because, they're making changes. And my feeling was, great, go for it. That's not going to work, but sure, fine. So she did. I didn't really think about it. A woman who lives here, who was a good friend, called my agent Amy one day, and she worked for ABC locally. She said, hey, Spencer's leaving the show. They're looking for a weatherman. I watch Tony every day. You should send Tony's info. Amy said, I already sent it. They have it. This friend, Alelia Bundles is her name. She said, oh, when did you send it? Amy said, here's the thing. Now, at the time, everyone in television, we all had reels. We had tapes that we would send out, our audition tapes. And they were always in these plastic black boxes. Smartest thing my agent ever did was she put mine in a red plastic box. So she told her friend Alelia, tell them they have his info. It's in a red plastic box. She called back an hour later, said they found it. Amidst all these tapes. So that was great. So they called. I was at Channel 5 one day. I got a phone call. It was the vice president of talent acquisition at ABC News. She said, she introduced herself, said, I was wondering if you might be interested in joining Good Morning America as the weatherman. And I'm on the phone, I'm like, yeah, sure. And I didn't quite, I always hear people saying this, and I did the same thing. I'm like, yeah, I didn't believe it. But she said, yeah, it's for real. We're changing the show. I said, so then I was like, okay, well, yeah, I'm very interested. But I start whispering. And Amy Entellus is her name. She's at CNN now. She said, let me guess, you're in the newsroom. You can't really talk. I said, that's right. She said, here's my number. Call me when you get home. And I called, and I joined Good Morning America, which was great.
So I have a question about weathermen, because I've always thought, when I was a kid at least, that you really had to be a meteorologist and you really had to understand all these complicated things. In those days, there wasn't all the great third-party services that provided you accurate weather. You had to make it all up yourself, right? That you had to learn all that to do this job?
I had to learn all of it. But I am probably one of the last weathermen, TV weathermen, particularly on a national level, who was not a meteorologist. I did not get a meteorology degree. It was not what I was interested in. I still don't have a degree in meteorology. Back then, if you remember Willard Scott, who was fantastic. My best friend and I actually started a Willard Scott fan club when we were like 13. Willard Scott, a lot of folks who worked in the business at that time, we're talking 60s, 70s, into the 80s, were not necessarily meteorologists. They had great personalities, and they could present the weather in a way that made sense to people. It wasn't as much about the science back then. Now it's much more about the science. So I kind of came in on the tail end of that. When I worked at Channel 5, when they called me about that job, the guy, and I was working with Donnie in radio, the guy who eventually hired me, said, hey, would you be interested in joining Fox Morning News as a weatherman? And I laughed and said, no, I'm not a weatherman. I don't know. He said, we'll teach you the weather, but we want you to go out in the field and interview people and go to the state fair. And, it was like a local version of what the Today Show was doing. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I can be on TV in my hometown every day? So I said, yeah. And I'm very glad I did, because it led to everything else.
Right. And on the network, I understand they sent you all around the country to like the big hurricanes and forest fires and things.
Yeah, so the network thing was great because I had learned weather. I certainly knew it as if like I was a meteorologist. Again, didn't have a degree. So Good Morning America, I worked with a meteorologist, and this is how they still do it. There's a meteorologist off air who puts together the maps and all that. This is on network TV, not on local. Puts together all the maps and everything, and we would every day talk through, here's what our focus is going to be, this is what we're going to do. But they would send me out on the big stories, hurricanes, wildfires, all that kind of stuff, because I understood it and because I could present that, my news presentation. The biggest compliment, well, actually, the biggest compliment I ever got was, one of the biggest compliments was from Charlie Gibson when I returned from some hurricane. And he said to me after the show the next day, he said, you were great out there. He said, we haven't had anybody who could do that before. So this is a good, big plus. Yeah. So that was great. That meant a lot to me, especially since that wasn't how I was trained.
So you're one of these guys who was standing out there in the raging wind and the things flying around behind you and trying to be calm about it.
Yeah, and I learned that, when you're doing hurricane coverage, and when you see the weather folks doing hurricane coverage and the reporters, we're covered, we got slickers on, and there's a big umbrella, and you got a hoodie and all that kind of stuff. It does not matter. At the end of the day, I would go home, or go back to my hotel soaking wet. I'm like, why did I put all this gear on? It didn't help at all. So, but those were interesting times. Those were scary, fun, you got your big adrenaline rush. It was fascinating.
That's great. So you've been working with Donnie Simpson on and off for many, many years.
Yes.
You sort of told us how that got started. Do you want to say anything more about how you got?
Just that Donnie's great. I started working with him in 1985 and joined that show. Here's one of the things. I've been very, very, very blessed because the people that I have had the opportunity to work with have almost uniformly been good people who are supportive. It's just really wonderful. From Donnie, from that first moment of I'll wait for you, and then when I worked with him, the first couple of years, WKYS was an NBC radio station. It isn't now, but it was back then. So we were in the NBC building, 4001 Nebraska Avenue, which is where I am now. And it was a union shop. I was not in the Performers Union, so I wrote material for Donnie. And I would literally, Donnie would be there, I'd be over here, he'd be on the air with our newsman, doing something, and I would write lines and then scoot him over. And he would, he would read the line, or I would produce little comedy bits and that kind of thing. And on one occasion, I wrote the line, scooted it over, he read it, and instead of saying it, just started laughing. and then he said to our newsman, John, on the air, he said, I'm sorry, John, Tony just wrote and did the line. Yeah. And after that show, Donnie said, you should be doing these lines. It takes, I'm talking, it takes you a minute to write it down, slide it, you should. So he pushed management to get me on the air. And I still remember this management didn't want to do it because it meant an increase in pay to $28,500 a year. They didn't want to go that high. So Donnie fought for it, and that was great. So then I joined him on the air. And that's when things really started clicking in terms of my radio career. I'd had a few jobs before then. My comedy career, which had been going fine, really kind of took off even more then. So it was a good thing. And I've always had people who were wonderful to me.
You really have that knack, I guess, for coming up with things at the spur of the moment. And, really, that's great. So here's the question I really been thinking all the time I wanted to ask you. You spend every morning from 5 o'clock in the morning on the air, doing the news. Then every afternoon from 3 to 7, doing radio. How does one person do all that, and what's a typical day like for you?
First of all, I'm doing it because I live in Virginia. My son is 20 years old and is a junior at the University of Maryland. Despite the fact Virginia has all these wonderful colleges, state colleges, he chose Maryland. His mom and I did not want to limit him. So I'm paying a lot of money for school. So 2 jobs is good right now. It's tough. So I get up most mornings at 2:15 or 2:30 a.m. I'm at the TV station at 4 a.m. I have an hour of prep, reading over stories, talking to the producers, the writers about what we're doing, all that kind of stuff. And then I'm on the air at 5 a.m. I'm on until 7. We do cut-ins during the Today Show, so I'm there for that. And then it depends on what's going on any given day. Many days I'm out of there by 8:30, 9 o'clock, 9:15, something like that. Some days I'm not, if I'm working on a story, what have you. I try to go home and get a nap. If I can get a nap 3 days a week, I'm good. Doesn't always happen, but I'll take a nap, and then I will get up. For me, the hardest part of my day is I get up, have something to eat, and then I go online and start reading over our radio producer, a guy named Rick Chill, not his real name, but he sends Donnie and I the stories that we may want to talk about. And it's like 20 to 25 stories. Some news stories, some funny stories, some celebrity stories, gossip, whatever. So I have to read through all of that. And then just to be prepared for whatever we're going to talk about. We talk about maybe 7 or 8 of those, but you got to go through them. That's the hardest part of my day because I'm tired, and as I'm reading them, I'm falling asleep. So that's hard. The show itself is fun. And then once the show's over at 7 p.m., I have dinner and relax for a little bit with my wife, maybe watch a little TV and go to bed. I try to get to bed by 8:30. Frequently don't make it. So by the weekends, I'm pretty tired.
What's it been like for your family? I mean, they must be very proud of you to be, a celebrity in the area and nationally even. But it must be hard on the family, I guess.
I'm sure they don't view me as a celebrity because they live with me in my moods every day. I don't think there are things about it that have been, when my son was younger, and if I was out with, like if he was 3 years old or something, and we were at the mall and it was just me and him, that would be tough because people are wonderful. People are very kind. They want to talk to you, tell you about their lives, all that kind of thing, which is great. But when I was with my son, like in the mall, it would be hard because I'm really trying to keep an eye on him and also engage in conversation over here. So that part was tough. And I think when my wife would experience that would get to her a little bit, but we understood it, My wife and son, everything that has happened has been a blessing. It's been wonderful. Have there been down times? Yes. Have there been tough times? Absolutely. But this job has allowed us to have a certain kind of lifestyle. My wife was able to, she worked her whole life, but then she was able to leave work for many years and to raise our son. So that's very fortunate. I don't think there are any complaints.
Great. I want to leave time for audience questions, but I have one thing I wanted to just slip in here. Tell us about this. I understand that you have a room in your house that is devoted to Beatles memorabilia.
Yes, it is.
Can you tell us the story of that and what you plan to do with that?
I am a huge Beatles fan. I am probably the biggest Beatles fan that you've ever met, who knows the story in and out, has all the records, seen all the interviews, all that kind of stuff. Just happens to be. And so I started collecting Beatles memorabilia many years ago. And, finally had enough when we bought our house, the house that we're in now. As we're looking through the model, I thought, ooh, this room, my wife was thinking, that would be a great playroom for our son. I thought, this is a great room for a Beatles museum. And amazingly, she said, okay, if that's what you want to do. So, yes, I have a set of autographs. I have, the Beatles lunchboxes from the 60s and rare records and all that kind of stuff. What do I plan to just keep it? I don't know what I plan to do with it when things are all over for me. Maybe I'll bequeath it to a museum.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, or you have hours for in your house with the museum.
Right, that's right.
25 cents. Right?
And let me just say really quick, because of the Beatles fandom thing, one of the best things that ever happened to me was when I was at Good Morning America, meeting Paul McCartney, and meeting and interviewing on numerous occasions Ringo Starr. I still get choked up talking about it. When it was going to happen, my producer Gary Stein, we're dear friends still. He said, "Hey, Ringo is going on tour, and they've offered us an interview." I said, "Great, let's do it." In my mind, I kept thinking, there is no way I'm going to meet and interview Ringo Starr. Even the day of, the interview was in Atlantic City where his band was rehearsing. And I had to take a car down after Good Morning America. On the entire ride down, I kept thinking, my phone is going to ring, Gary is going to say, Ringo's canceled, it's not going to happen, and I'm going to turn around and go back. But got there, Ringo was there. He was fantastic. He was great, funny, and put me at ease right away. I talked to him for 25 minutes, which is rare with those guys. They give you like 12 minutes or something like that. At the end of it, we're sitting across each other like this. And at the end of it, I said, "This has been a dream come true. And thank you so much, blah, blah, blah." And I start to get up, and he gets up and he says, "Oh, come on, give us one of those hugs." And I got to interview him several times, and I don't have his phone number or anything, but we are friendly, which is mind-boggling to me. He and his wife when my son was born, sent to the house an amazing bouquet of flowers. And I have the card to Tony and Rhonda. Congratulations on the birth of little Ringo. So that's pretty amazing.
That's great. Okay. I bet there's some questions out there in the audience. Yes?
Hi there. I started watching you in the mornings when you were on Channel 9 because it was you. You moved out the way. Then I followed you to Channel 5, I'm sorry. And then Channel 9. Yeah, well, Channel 4, but we'll talk about that offline. I want to know, I know that the news comes and there's horrific types of news that comes through, and you all are human just like the rest of us. How do you manage any emotions that you have when you hear about the wars and the killing and the Black Lives Matter and so forth? How do you manage that and then put on that face when you get in front of the camera?
That's a great question. It is sometimes difficult. I have to admit that there are times where I've had to kind of step away from it because it wears on your mental health. I think that's maybe one of the reasons I'm happy that I have the other outlet in the afternoons, because even though we talk about some of what's going on in the news, it is primarily a fun, upbeat, have a good time kind of show, radio show. So it can be tough. You almost want to try to block it out to some extent, but I think that over the years, it just feels like the stakes have gotten so high that you can't block it out. And you just have to manage it as best you can. I'll say this, I think many of our employers understand this and are very good about every network I've worked at. They have mental health care if someone needs it. I don't think there's any boss that I've ever had where if I went to them and said, I got to take a day, where they would not have said, okay, do that. I get it. So that's fortunate, but it can be tough.
First of all, I admire you in the 70s. You were so good looking. And right now, I think you're better.
Well, thank you. I wasn't sure where that was headed.
I admire you so much. I live in Virginia. It took me an hour and a half to get here. It's worth it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. That is very, very kind. That's a pet peeve of mine, the traffic.
Hi, I'm a native Washingtonian. I've watched you on your different stations and routes, and I've always admired how well you got along with each team. You know, I know it's an adjustment with different personalities, but you seem to flow in and get along with everyone. So I've never heard your joke. So could you give us a joke?
Oh boy. So at this point, I can only be hopefully naturally funny. You know, when you're a comedian, that's one of the things a comedian hates to have asked. Give me a joke on demand because it's almost never going to go well. I don't remember. Well, I remember some of my jokes, but it would be weird to do them out of context all these years later. But hopefully, I've been amusing. Can I say one thing because AARP is here? No, because I'm a member, and I am all about the whole disrupt aging thing.
Yes.
And that's one of the things I am very proud of, excited about, because like I said, I'm 64 years old. Yes, I've worked at all the stations. And let me also say, I'm sorry I've jumped around so much. Those of you who have followed me, thank you for doing it. I will not put you through it anymore. This is it. I'm at my last job, but you've been very, very kind. But to have the opportunity to join NBC4 in my 60s, to be hired for a big job, that's fantastic. This is an age when, a lot of folks are starting to think, or even if we don't want to think, hey, it might be time to retire, what have you, the employers sometimes, they feel like it's time to retire. And for NBC4 to hire me, I was 63 when they hired me, and they, knock on wood, want me to be around for a while. I want to do it for a while. That's fantastic, because I hope to be doing this when I'm 70 years old. And, Donnie does a lot of work with AARP. I would like to do more work with AARP, but when I first got an invitation to join AARP when I was 50, I thought, are you kidding me? I almost wanted to call and say, do not send these things. 45
now.
Is it 45? Y'all are pushing it. And it took me a few years, but I did finally join. Right, and I'm very I very much believe the whole thing. You're as old as you feel. We do what we want to do. We continue our careers and all that kind of stuff. Keep doing what you're doing because it's a joy and a blessing. Really. Yes.
I think it's a comment more than anything else. You're sitting there and you're so approachable. About 25 years ago, I was the one sitting in front of you in one of the restaurants, watching you while you and your family were eating, and of course didn't have the guts to go and say, "Hi, I'm a big fan."
I remember you.
I was
You were having,
and your face was on every bus driving through. So, what anchors you?
Oh, what anchors me? Yeah. Oh boy. So I did an event last night for the Alexandria branch of the NAACP, and someone asked a similar question after the event was over. And I always talk about my mom and dad. Neither are with us anymore, unfortunately. My mom died 5 years ago. I had a great mom and dad. My brother and I both did. And they divorced when I was maybe 11, 12 years old, something like that. So that was tough. My dad remarried a couple of times after that. My mom did not. But they were both funny people. They were great parents. Obviously, some things were tough. We were not, we didn't have money or anything like that. But we had a great childhood. They were both, my dad, when I started kind of following in his footsteps and doing pretty well, he was very proud of me. And we would be someplace and he would introduce, is my aunt in here, Chiquita?
No, but your Aunt Sharon is.
Oh, hi! Oh my goodness. He would introduce me to people, say, oh, this is my son, Anthony, is what they called me. This is my son, Anthony. He produces a Donnie Simpson show, and he's going to be doing a comedy show. And I would say, Dad, don't give the resume. And later on, I realized he's proud. And this is great. This is really, really nice. My brother is a very creative person. He's an artist, and he has worked in television. He is right now he's the vice president for creative services at Fox 5, where I used to work, and he's been there about 10 years. If you see the promos that are on TV with the Fox 5 morning crew, and they're funny and clever, he writes all of those. Most of those, comes up with them and all that kind of thing. Very successful. He worked at BET back in the 80s and helped to brand BET. And then he worked at CNN. So he's been very successful, but he's done his own thing. I've done my own thing. And our parents, they never said, when I left after college, I was a desk assistant. That's the entry-level job at ABC News downtown. This is before KYS or anything like that. When I left that job and said, I want to give comedy a go full time, I think my mom maybe looked at me like, and then she said, okay, that's what you want to do. They never put down anything that we wanted to do. And even though the kind of stuff we wanted to do was kind of artsy and in these worlds where people think that's a hard way to make a living in terms of trying to advance in it, they were very supportive. So I think it comes from that, having great parents who were great to us, didn't slap us around and all that kind of stuff. I think that's where it comes from.
You got another question?
Yes. Sorry, my answer's long. I'm sorry.
So at the end of the day, you're a husband, you're a father, you've had a successful career. What really, at this season of your life, what informs Tony Perkins? I came to fatherhood late. I was in my 40s. I have one son. When I was younger, I thought I didn't want children. When I was at Good Morning America, the first several years, I still was, my wife and I did not have our son yet. My producer, Gary Stein, who I mentioned, very funny guy, former actor, comedy writer, great TV producer. He has kids, and his kids were young, and he would tell me, I went to my son's baseball game, and softball game, and all this stuff. And I met his children. His children are great. And I would listen to him, and I would kind of say jokingly, oh, that just sounds so exciting. Wow. Meanwhile, and I would say to him, oh, Rhonda and I, we went to a concert, and, and make fun of, you're tied down by these children. I'm not. So it came to me late, and as everybody, you all know this, everybody says it, I say it now too, it is the greatest thing in the world when you have a child. And it's the most important thing you do. I look at my son, he's 20, he's very smart, he's very together, he's smarter than I was at his age, and I already know, and he's not even out of college yet, I already know he's going to surpass anything that I've done. And that makes me very excited and very proud, and that's what kind of drives me. My favorite things now are when I get to hang out with my son. Last week, my son and I had an opportunity to, I hesitate to bring this up because this guy is in the news today and not for great reasons. Dave Chappelle was in town last week, and we went to see him. I took my son because I thought, this is like seeing Richard Pryor back in the 70s and 80s. He's at the top of his game, all that kind of thing. So we went to see him and then had the opportunity to meet him afterwards and spend time with him. It was great. It was humbling. It was exciting. But I was more thrilled that my son was getting to experience this. So it's all about, the kids.
Gary, I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, So I'm a fan of your podcast.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and you've mentioned Gary Stein a few times. Is there any chance that that might be coming back for like a special edition?
We should. Gary and I talked about this last week. Back in 2013 or 14. All right, so I should have Gary on the phone because he would love that I'm talking about him. Gary's a New Yorker. He's 5 years older than me. He is one of the greatest people on the planet. When I went to Good Morning America, they wanted to assign me a producer because it's better if you have someone who's with you all the time, knows you, you're like a team. And I wanted to bring the guy that I've been working with at Fox 5 with me, who's also a dear friend. And he flew up to New York. They interviewed him. He had a great interview. And I thought, this is going to be great. And then one of their executives said, we have someone we want you to meet. And it was Gary. And Gary came to the offices, and I interviewed him and met him. And an hour later, I thought to myself, wow, I've got to tell my friend Dave that we're not going to hire him because this guy is fantastic. Gary's very, very funny, as you know, if you listen to the podcast. Michael Mara, I don't know how many of you know that name from the Michael Mara show, the Don and Mike show years ago. Mike is also a college friend. Mike has his own podcast and his own network, and many years ago he asked if I'd like to do a podcast. I said yes, but I don't want to do it by myself. I would like to have a partner, and I want it to be Gary Stein. They didn't know who Gary was, but they said, whatever you want to do. So Gary and I did a podcast for 4 years. It was it was a comedy and entertainment podcast. We had a blast doing it. It was a very successful podcast in terms of the shows that we did, the guests that we booked, the amount of fun that we had, the avid fan base that we had. But it was very difficult to grow the fan base because I'm as old as I am and Gary's as old as he is. We tended to skew older. And this is like 10 years ago. It was very difficult to get an older audience because not only did we have to say, and it seems like ages ago, here's what a podcast is, then we would have to say, and here's how you get one. And it was a struggle. So we ended up leaving it. We miss it. It's my favorite thing I've ever done in my life. And I've done a lot of things because it was mine. We did what we wanted to do. We talk about it. We'll see.
Okay, I'd be there day one.
Thank you. And I'm going to call Gary when I leave here. He's going to be thrilled.
So just to wrap this up, can you please do for us the conclusion you used to do at your stand-up comic routines, I understand, which is to do a Bob Dylan imitation singing the Flintstones song.
Oh, boy, wow. Now he just put me on the spot more than you did, asking me to do a joke. I used to close with that because it always did very well, because people would not expect that, a black comedian, and, I'm doing a Bob Dylan impression. So I did Bob. I forget how I would get into it, but I would have a little guitar, and I would say, I don't know how I got into it. I have to kind of replay it in my mind, but I would say, this is Bob Dylan doing the theme to the Flintstones. I guess maybe that's what and it would be, Meet the Flintstones, modern Stone Age family. The page right out of history. And it's easy to do a Bob Dylan impression because the man can't sing. I love him, but he can't.
Well, I did put you on the spot, but you did very well with that. Thank you for joining us. This has been wonderful. I'm sure people want to crowd after you now and get more selfies. But if you haven't had a chance yet to get your vaccines or your health screenings or see our exhibitors, we're here till 4. Please enjoy yourselves and have a great afternoon. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you very, very much. This has been wonderful. I appreciate it.
Hope to see you next year at the next expo.